Listen carefully, because what you're about to hear sounds ridiculous at first, like one of those exaggerated spacer bar stories that get better with every retelling, but I promise you this is a documented incident pulled straight from a classified interstellar transport log, and if you enjoy stories where humanity accidentally terrifies the entire galaxy just by being, well, human, then before you forget, make sure to subscribe to Coming the HFY, because this one is exactly why that channel exists. And it all started on an otherwise routine morning aboard the deep space cargo vessel Celestial Drift, a ship that had survived ion storms, pirate ambushes, quantum engine misfires, and once even a diplomatic crisis involving 3 species arguing over the ownership of a moon that turned out not to exist. Yet none of those prepared Captain Dareth's soul for the moment a human engineer named Lyra Grant stepped onto his ship carrying a small duffel bag that was very clearly moving on its own. Shaking in short, aggressive bursts like something inside it had opinions about being contained, and when she smiled, wide, relaxed, completely unbothered, and said, "Morning, Captain, hope it's okay, I brought Noodle with me." That was the exact moment every survival instinct Dareth had ever developed began screaming at him in 12 different languages, because nothing that moves like that inside a bag should ever be described with a name like Noodle, and before he could even ask the obvious question, why is it moving, the bag emitted a sharp, chittering sound that caused 2 security officers to instinctively deploy their defensive plating and 1 communications specialist to drop her tablet entirely, and Lyra, completely unfazed, crouched down and unzipped the bag as if she were opening a lunchbox, and out popped a long, slender, golden-brown creature with bright eyes, twitching whiskers, and the kind of energy that suggested it had just woken up and immediately decided today would be chaotic, and the moment its tiny paws touched the polished metal floor it froze for half a second, scanned the room, and then, without warning, exploded into motion, darting between legs, under equipment, across crates, moving so fast that the ship's motion sensors briefly flagged it as a glitch in the system, and Commander Reth, a 4-limbed veteran of ground combat operations, let out a noise that could only be described as a dignified scream before climbing onto a cargo container and pointing down at the creature with all 4 arms while shouting, "It is a tunnel predator. It moves like liquid death," and Lyra blinked, genuinely confused, and said, "What? No, that's just Noodle, he's a ferret," which did absolutely nothing to calm anyone because the translation system rendered ferret as elongated burrow hunter with persistent prey drive, which somehow made it worse, and within seconds the ship's automated hazard system kicked in, alarms blaring as a calm synthetic voice announced, "Unknown biological entity detected. Threat classification pending. All personnel proceed to secure zones," while Noodle, apparently thrilled by the sudden noise and movement, began what could only be described as a celebratory rampage, zigzagging across the docking bay, skidding around corners, bouncing off a wall, and then popping up onto his hind legs to stare directly at a security drone before launching himself at it in what the xenobiology officer later described as a prelude to dismemberment, except he didn't dismember anything, he just booped it with his nose and then ran off again like he had important appointments elsewhere, and by the time Captain Dareth made it to the bridge, half the crew had sealed themselves inside auxiliary compartments, the other half were tracking the creature on internal sensors with expressions of existential dread, and Lieutenant Kesh, usually unshakable, whispered through the comms, "Captain, it is everywhere at once. It does not follow linear movement patterns, it doubles back, it vanishes into openings that should not physically accommodate it," and Dareth, already regretting every decision that led him to this moment, turned slowly to Lyra and said, "Explain," and she shrugged casually and said, "He just likes exploring. Also, if you have any loose cables or socks, you might want to secure those, he steals stuff." And that was when the first report came in that the creature had acquired a navigation chip and dragged it into a maintenance duct, prompting Officer Vryn to shout, "It is collecting artifacts. This is territorial behavior," while another crew member fainted quietly in the background, and the ship's xenobiologist, Dr. Halen, began rapidly dictating notes into her recorder, listing traits in a rising pitch. Elongated musculoskeletal structure optimized for rapid directional changes, dentition capable of piercing dermal layers. Behavioral indicators suggest high curiosity coupled with predatory instinct. Oh stars, it's smiling, why is it smiling? While Lyra laughed, actually laughed. And said, that's not a smile, he's just excited. And Captain Dareth had to take a moment to process the idea that this hyperactive, unstoppable, chaos-driven organism was considered excited rather than dangerous, and things escalated further when the internal cameras caught Noodle performing a series of erratic hops, twists, and sideways leaps that looked like a tactical evasion maneuver combined with a celebratory ritual, and Dr. Halen, voice trembling, identified it as a combat readiness display. Only for Lyra to correct her with, that's the weasel war dance, he does it when he's happy. And there was a long, heavy silence on the bridge as everyone collectively reconsidered their understanding of both the creature and the species that had domesticated it. Because if this was happiness, then what did aggression look like? And before anyone could answer that, Noodle disappeared into a ventilation shaft carrying what appeared to be a shiny tool, triggering another round of alarms and at least one whispered prayer from a crew member who did not have a religion until that moment. And Captain Dareth finally snapped, turning to Lyra with the calm intensity of someone holding on to sanity by a thread and saying, "Retrieve your animal," and she nodded cheerfully, knelt down, and called out in a gentle voice, "Noodle, treat." And like some kind of summoned entity, the creature reappeared almost instantly, emerging from a panel it definitely had not entered from, sprinting across the deck, and launching itself onto her shoulder where it curled up like a fuzzy scarf, accepting a small pellet from her hand and making a soft, satisfied chirping sound that the translation system helpfully labeled as contentment. And the entire bridge crew just stared in stunned silence as the supposed apex tunnel predator settled into a loaf position against her neck, eyes half closed, completely harmless, and Lyra looked around at the terrified, exhausted, deeply confused aliens and said, "See? He's a good boy." And in that moment, Captain Dareth's soul realized something far more unsettling than the creature itself, something that would later be added to the official report and circulate through interstellar command structures as a cautionary note about human behavior. If humanity considered this level of unpredictability, speed, and chaotic energy to be normal, if they casually kept such beings as companions, fed them, named them, loved them, then the real question was not whether the creature was dangerous, but what kind of environment had shaped a species that looked at it and thought, "Yes, this belongs in my home." And as the alarms finally quieted and the crew slowly emerged from their hiding places, keeping a very respectful distance from Lyra and her now sleeping Noodle, Dareth updated the ship's logs with a new, unofficial protocol note. All future human passengers are to declare any accompanying lifeforms in advance, regardless of size, shape, or perceived harmlessness. And then, after a pause, he added one more line, one that would later be quoted in training manuals across 3 sectors. Do not underestimate anything a human describes as just a pet.